Hey, I'm Jay Kumar, the BassBlaster, and this is your Abu Garcia REVO Top 5 Tips, Techniques, and Trends of the Month. Number 1. Oh, you might have been like that when you first saw the OSP rubber dice, which is actually called dice rubber, and I call them fuzzy dice. But anyhow, you might have laughed when this little deal first popped up in March 2023. That was when Japan's Kiyoyo Fujita finished second at the seminal Bassmaster Elite fishing it. And everybody was like, what the heck? I mean, Joey Cifuentes won that tournament on a drop shot, which was mind-blowing enough. And the guy who almost won it was fishing a piece of bubblicious bubble gum with hair sticking out of it. The ultimate bubble has the ultimate flavors. Now, sometime after that, guys started using it on the down low. Then it got a little more known when G-Crack and Alton Jones Jr. came out with their version of it this year. Man, that's all good, but what if you could just roll your own? What if that worked just as good? That's what Michael Top 10 Neal did to get his cautious smallmouths to commit. And he won the MLF Bass Pro Tour event on the St. Lawrence River doing it. What he did was he pinched off a piece of Big Bite Bait's Sensation Quarantine Craw, that is a mouthful, and he threaded exactly 8 strands of skirt material or spinnerbait skirt material through that. Then Drew Benton did basically the same thing with a couple Spro soft plastics, and he finished 7th at the Bassmaster Elite on the same body of water 2 weeks later. So if your fish have seen a lot of pressure or are nipping or are following and won't commit, try sticking some skirt strands through a piece of soft plastic or a Ned bait and see what happens, man. Number 2. So originally dice baits were made to fish weightless or on a drop shot. Doesn't look like they have much action, but how could they? If you assume, like I did, that those skirt strands must move a heck of a lot, they don't. Nevertheless, they get bit.
That's great! That's just great!
Not sure if the chief is stoked or not. Anyhow, another way they could be fished is hovering them or kind of doing a hover drop. 22-year-old Bassmaster Opens phenom Easton Fothergill just won his 2nd Open of the year on Leech Lake, Minnesota, doing exactly that with the non-salt version of the OSP Dice Rubber. Now, he said he dropped it and he kept it in the middle of the water column initially. In other words, he hovered it, which is also called tight lining in some parts. If a smallmouth came up and took a look at it but didn't commit, he dropped the bait to the bottom and he shook it there to try and trigger a strike. Now, when I say he dropped it, bear in mind that he only weighted that little piece of soft plastic with a hook with a 1/32 ounce Nico weight. So it looks something like this. In other words, the fish are getting a real good look at it and they still bite it. Why? Because they haven't seen it before? Maybe because it looks like fish bubblicious to them? Now, whatever the deal is, it works. But if you have too much ADD to let a bait soak like that,
you don't have the right temperament for the trade.
I don't think I do either, man. Number 3. Pressure. Pushing down on them. Okay, I think we have 3 types of pressure in bass fishing. You got fishing pressure, you've got activity pressure, meaning a lot of activity on a body of water, and then you got ping pressure. At a big tournament, you've got all 3, which means it affects the fish, which means you've got to adjust. Let's take a look at the St. Lawrence River in New York. Now, it's gotten a lot of attention the last couple of years from all the insane tournament catches and all that live coverage. Plus, Bassmaster ranked the St. Lawrence River / Lake Ontario the #1 fishery, bass fishery in the country for 2 out of the last 4 years, and it was 2nd and 4th in those other 2 years. So that water, the river, which includes eastern Lake Ontario, is getting the most attention it ever has. And even though there's a million fish out there, they're feeling that pressure. Corey Johnston, who just won the Bassmaster Elite there, said he has never in all his years seen those fish so tight-lipped. The first 2 days he had to cast his drop shot out and literally not move it. He could not give that bait any action whatsoever beyond whatever it was doing down there, or the fish would not bite. And remember, we're talking usually super hyper-aggressive smallmouth here. The last 2 days, he said he had to cast his drop shot rig way out beyond the groups of smallmouth and drag it to him. Because he said if he dropped it on them and they saw it fall, they weren't gonna bite. Fish can learn fast, man. Now, 2 weeks before that, on the same body of water, Michael Neal once again had to add those skirt strands to his bait to get his fish to commit. And Easton Fothergill told me that even though his particular fish at that Leech Lake Open were not getting pressured directly, they were acting like it because they, quote, felt the tournament pressure and shut down. So those three winners, Corey, Michael, and Easton, had to do something different with their baits or rigs because of those three pressures. Yep, somehow, some way, fish apparently do feel all that sonar pressure. And if you don't believe me, number 4. Hey, never believe what you see, man, like this.
Ignition. Right away, Houston.
Hey, I mean, who was on the moon filming that? And how did they get that immediate video feed in 1972? That's for you, conspiracy peeps. Anyhow, definitely believe these two guys. First up is Jacob Wheeler, no doubt the best bass fisherman at the tour level for the last few years now. Now, he said, this year was the first year where I'd pan over there with active target and the lead fish would feel it of a group and head toward the bottom and take all the rest of the fish with it. The first time I have seen that was this season. And then he said, this is the start of it. The fish that were offshore and were never messed with are starting to feel that pressure. That full interview is on BassBlaster.rocks, by the way. Then I talked to the best tournament bass fisherman of all time, the great Kevin Van Dam, and he said, there's no question that bass are already getting conditioned to these forward-facing sonar presentations and anglers have to adapt. That deep suspended segment of the bass population never got pressured in the past, but now it's getting the focal point of all the pressure. Things will definitely shift. They always have. Now, even though science says bass can't hear sonar or feel it or whatever, so it must be boat noise or something, whatever it is, it seems like the bass are feeling something and then reacting in a negative way, like you just heard from these two guys.
What was that?
Now, will we go from the last few years and then circle back to bank beating?
They can put a man on the moon.
Yeah, but they can't put a moon on a man.
Hey, maybe they can. Number 5. Austin Powers once famously said,
Do I make you Randy?
he was not talking about Randy Howell, and he for sure wasn't talking about light and medium light spinning rods, but that's because he was behind the times, baby! Now those lighter spin poles, which in the past were like for crappie and trout and fly fishing, are being used by serious tournament bass heads. Why? Let's get into it. Corey Johnston used a 6'10" light action Daiwa BLX rod on Lake Ontario. I asked him why, and he said a couple things. Number 1, he didn't need more power because he was fishing in the middle of a lake and those fish weren't going to get wrapped around anything. He also said he likes it for drop shotting because he uses a real small number 2 hook, and that way he can fight the fish and the rod has more give, and so that hook won't pull out. Then I talked to a couple rod guys about it, Mike Welsh at Abu Garcia Rods and Tyler Schmidt at Fenwick. They said they see more of their pros using these lighter action spinning rods because when they're working their minnow, it doesn't move it as much, so they can keep it in that target depth range better. In other words, a stouter rod, when you're jigging it, would pull the minnow up and down more. So a softer rod also means a little softer action for those baits. For the same reason, a lighter rod when you're bouncing around in waves means if you're fishing a drop shot, that drop shot doesn't move around as much when you're bouncing around out there. The last thing the guys said are that current hooks are now super sharp and many are nano coated, So hook penetration with light action rods is way less of an issue than it was even 5 years ago. And more guys are fighting spinning rod fish with the real drag more than the rod itself. So there's you some rod intel. Don't be afraid to lighten them up. That's all I got for you this time. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Abu Garcia REVO. Go to BassBlaster.com or .rocks to sign up for the juice-filled Bassy email. See you next week. God bless you.